We are often referred to as an Am Kshei Oref, a stubborn and intransigent people who will unflinchingly stick to our guns no matter what. The story is told of the Yanover Rebbe who was once traveling with a caravan of Hasidim to attend his daughter's wedding. And on the way, the Hasidim made a pit stop, briefly to rest and to engage in prayer. The Rebbe, as was his custom, broke off to the side to afford himself some privacy as he communicated with the Almighty. Only when they turned around after the prayers, the holy Yanover was nowhere to be found. His disciples searched frantically for hours for their beloved teacher, but to no avail, and reasoning that it must have been another caravan, another ride came along, and he had hitched a ride with them to the wedding of his daughter, the Hasidim departed with no choice from their rest stop, and they made their way to the wedding without him. Tragically, though, the Rebbe never did catch another ride, another wagon. Instead, he found himself lost in the dark maze of a forest, meandering hopelessly, searching for a way out for weeks on end, surviving on berries, assorted plants, and streams of water along the way. And throughout the arduous weeks spent in the forest, the Rebbe lost track of time and became confused about the very day of the week. He convinced himself that it was in fact one day later than the actual date. By way of miracle, the saintly master eventually was able to find his way home, having missed the wedding of his daughter and his clothing all dirtied, exhausted and emaciated from the trip. But the Rebbe insisted that the day of the week was Friday. For the other Hasidim, though, it was Thursday. And for the rest of the next couple of weeks, they debated. The Rebbe kept Shabbos one day earlier than all of the Hasidim. Unwilling to listen to reason, the Yanover insisted upon observing Shabbos when he felt was the correct date, while the Hasidim pleaded with him, telling him that he must have lost track of time. But he wouldn't listen to reason. And so, with the help of his good colleague, Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg, they concocted a brilliant plan. They would arrange for a Shabbos Tish, usually done in Hasidic circles on Friday night after davening, after the meal. And they arranged all the Hasidim around, and they had the Rebbe dress up in his lavish clothing, wearing his Shabbos Bekesha, and they instructed the Hasidim to arrange for all the delicious food and the beautiful song that were the tradition of the Friday night Tish, only to do so on a Thursday night, because the Rebbe himself thought it was Shabbos. And they sat down with the Rebbe, and the Shmelka brought not just his full Shabbos regalia, where he dressed up properly in his strimo and his bekesha, but he also joined the Rebbe for the Tish to follow, sat next to him, and brought copious amounts of fine wine. Rav Shmelka even brought along a special bottle of aged wine, which was sure to knock his friend out for a long nap. And the plan worked like a charm, and when the Yanover came to, it was already Friday night. 24 hours later, he had been out cold, with his face down on the Shabbos table. And all the Hasidim who played along with Tish and the charade were now ready for the real Tish, for the real Friday night. And thus the Rebbe was realigned with the proper date. Stubbornness, akshanos, can be a terrible trait. How many people do we know who are so intractable like the Rebbe? They make the lives of those around them miserable in the hopes of satisfying their unyielding opinions and their own mishigas. In fact, the Talmud tells us that stubbornness is decidedly not the appropriate way for a Ben Torah, for a Torah scholar to behave. Instead, the Gemara praises those who are flexible, who are pliable, who are willing to compromise. Says the Gemara in Tanis Daf Chafim and Beis, Miyad Nichnas Rabbi Eliezer B'Shimon V'Darash Le'olam Yehei Adam Rach Kekana. A person should be soft and flexible like a reed. Va'al Yehei Kasha Ke'erez, and don't be hard and stubborn like a cedar. Lefichach, says the Gemara, Zocha Kanalito. If you're Zocha, if you're meritorious, you will take a reed and you will compose a Sefer Torah with that very reed. And while obstinacy is a reprehensible trait, there is a verse in our Parsha which might have us thinking otherwise. Torah tells us about Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Asher Lo Miskinut, Tochal Ba Lechem, Lo Sechsar Ba Kol Ba, Eretz Asher Avaneha Barzel Maharea, Tachtzov Nechoshes. The land that is compared to being something that is hard as iron. And the verse dealing with the physical characteristics of Eretz Yisrael, the Talmud expounds that this verse, in fact, refers to something much different. Kol Talmid Chacham, she'eno kasha kebarzel, eno Talmid Chacham. Any Torah scholar that is not hard like iron is not a Talmud Chacham. The Gemara continues, what's the source of this incredible statement that we should be stubborn, that we should be intractable? Al tikri avaneha labonea. Eretz asher avneha barzel, the land whose stones are hard as iron. Don't read stones, rather boneha, the builders. If you want to be a builder of Zion, if you want to be a Talmud Chacham, you better be stubborn. You better be impossible and mobile in your tracks. You better stick to your guns beyond reason. Rav Menachem Sachs, in his Torah commentary, Menachem Tzion comments upon this apparent contradiction. On the one hand, Chazal note that not only are we cautioned to be flexible, olam yehi adam rach kekana, soft as a reed, but that inflexibility and stubbornness lies in contrast with the very essence of menschlichkeit and human decency. In fact, there are five tractates in the Babylonian Talmud in which the Gemara ends the Masechta with the phrase Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. Scholars bring peace to the world. They are flexible. The mandate of a Torah scholar is to be generous, peace-seeking, compromise, and to eschew akshanos. How then can we understand the verse in our Parsha, which is expounded by the Gemara, implying that a prerequisite for a Torah scholar is obstinacy and intractability? Rav Sachs answers that in fact there is no contradiction at all. One can exhibit each of these traits at different moments in our lives. And this has practical implications as well as spiritual ones. I'd like to quote Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame, who once said that if you're not stubborn, you'll give up on experiments way too soon. And if you're not flexible, you'll pound your head against the wall and you won't see a different solution to a problem you're trying to solve. It is necessary at times to be kasheh kebarzel, to be stubborn like iron, unwilling to yield. And there are many instances as a Jew in which compromising would be a tragic error in judgment. For instance, should we compromise on intermarriage? Should we consider giving up on tefillah b'tzibor because it's difficult altogether? What about Torah education for our children? Should we give up on that? Honesty in our business dealings, working on Shabbos, or appropriate conduct between men and women. For these types of decisions and so many more, compromise is simply never an option. But then again, there are times in which the spirit of compromise and agreeability is exactly what the moment calls for. Marital disagreements, monetary disputes, the ability to adjust your plans when circumstances change beneath your feet. Too many of us fall apart completely when things don't go as anticipated. For us and for the world, this year has been a time which has demanded flexibility of us. To be rach kekana, each of the smachot, the bar, the bat mitzvahs, the weddings, as well as the sad occurrences, the funerals, lo aleinu, have demanded of us to reconsider, to reconfigure our plans and our attitudes. But at the same time, in which we had to downsize our weddings, shrink our guest lists, switch from a live version of Shweki to the recording, we would never dream of compromising the core halachic and traditional values and structures of the wedding and of the bar mitzvah and of the funeral. The key is to have a flexible demeanor, but not flexible principles. Kasheh kebarzel and rach kekana are not contradictory principles. They are 2 points on our compass. They are prisms through which every single ritual and decision needs to be refracted. Indeed, if we think about the extreme fringes of our Jewish community, they invariably fall into one of these 2 poles. Either they are unflinchingly and overly uncompromising on religious sentiment, or flippant and eager to make concessions regardless of the need to do so. Both extremes are dangerous and will erode the spirit of our Holy Torah. The Yanover Rebbe's akshanos, his stubbornness, caused him to lose out on one of the most precious moments in a man's life, the wedding of one's own daughter. And while this is a cute tale, and yes, it's extraordinarily implausible, many real figures have missed out on life's most treasured moments because they could not yield, because they couldn't let go. Piety, according to the Rambam, involves walking the middle path, the golden mean between two extremes. May we succeed in walking that path for all of our days, hard as iron and soft as a reed. Shabbat Shalom.